Hello and welcome to another edition of Another Book Review. This week I will be giving a spoiler-full review, thoughts, comments on Donna Tartt's The Little Friend. This is not going to be as structured as my other normal videos. This will basically just be my thoughts after reading the book. I finished it up today, and I will be going deep into spoilers. So if you haven't read The Little Friend, I would ask you to not watch this, and I will be going into spoilers in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so some thoughts I had on reading the book. I am a fan of Donna Tartt, and I think this book, from what I've gathered on browsing the internet, is this book is kind of a 3 books she's written to be kind of the less well-known or less well-received of the 3 of them. I think the reason for that is that there may be a couple reasons. The subject matter is pretty dark. I think even more so than The Secret History, because you're dealing with children primarily throughout the book. There's a child who's almost murdered a couple times in the book. There's pretty explicit drug use. There is a real brief period of self-harm. But it's pretty gritty, and I think the other part of it too, my sense in just talking to people about Donna Tartt is that the thing that most people gravitate towards Donna Tartt, the work that she does, is mostly kind of her ability to just compose very beautiful, lyrical, flowing sentences. I think that she pulled back from that on this book, I think in part just to kind of emphasize the gritty nature that the characters are going through. There's a spoiler-free video that I'm going to post if I've not posted it already, that I kind of have general thoughts on the book. Looking back on it, I think some of my frustrations, on one hand, I do appreciate the idea of having a mystery. And this novel is kind of set up like your typical mystery. There's a crime that opens the book. You have a character who's kind of deemed to be the person who's going to be solving, the detective-like character. And you're kind of expecting them to do what detectives normally do, which is gather clues, interview witnesses, and then push forward and arrest the person responsible or bring them to justice in some way. On some level, I appreciate her kind of twisting that convention, just basically being like, no, this character is not going to do any kind of truth-finding whatsoever. She's just going to take the word of 2 people, then she's going to spend her whole summer trying to kill this guy. On one hand, I thought that was kind of a fascinating way to look at it. On the other hand, I don't know how realistic that was for a 12-year-old, and B, I think she puts forward Harriet as a very intelligent character, and so it's frustrating a little bit that she would just be like, okay, these 2 people said he may be a suspect, he may have done it, that's good enough for me, let's go. And I was expecting, and the character kind of comes to that realization at the end of the book, and it just is so kind of blaringly obvious while you're reading it to be like, oh, wow, I guess she's going to try to kill this guy on very, very little hard evidence. And that, to me, was a little surprising because I think she is supposed to be put forward as not a kind of flaky person, but someone who is very intelligent about the world and very capable person. And so that was, on some level, kind of frustrating. On other levels that I think were frustrating, I think the book puts forward what I would call sub-themes, or just kind of real brief things that you're like, okay, well, this is going to tie into the novel at a later time. And so the book kind of puts itself, I think, as a matriarchal book in the sense that, let me rephrase that. Because of the family structure of Harriet, in that Harriet's mother, her sister, and 3 other aunts, her 4 other aunts, are all female. There are no males in her family whatsoever. Her dad has kind of left the family, has been away for essentially since her brother was killed. I thought that Donna Tartt was putting forward some kind of idea or going to dive into feminism or commentary on men or commentary on women or something, and it just is kind of not the case. And just, it's hard reading it sometimes from a perspective of, okay, well, there's that sub-theme. There's a sub-theme of tribulation. I think it's Tribulation is the name of the old family house. And you're like, okay, well, this is going to tie back into the book. And I didn't feel that it did at all, other than the birthday party where Danny may have seen Edie and so that may be why Edie recognizes him years later when she sees him drive by, but then nothing really comes of that. And you're like, okay, well, is this a commentary on the family and what happened with his family? And it turns out not having anything to do with anything. There is the Odoms, who are mentioned several times in the book as this kind of poor black family, and then you're like, okay, well, they're going to be witnesses to the crime or something, because they kind of keep popping up. She keeps seeing the younger Odom daughter, and she sees her with her gloves that she may have stolen from her house. But again, there doesn't seem to be any kind of tie back into what happened with her brother. And so that happened a couple times, and it kind of gets brought up in this sense of like, well, why do you have these characters in this book if they're not doing anything? And I feel that there's kind of a thin line, I guess, between having too much of a character and having not enough. And for me, it may just be me, and I'll admit to it maybe being me, Donna Tartt seems to always cross that line between this is how much I need to write about the character, and if I write any more of it, this reviewer, is going to think I've gone and made this character more important than they are. And for some reason, I always take the bait with Donna Tartt, because I did in The Secret History as well. There's a character in there, and I'm like, well, she's built this character up. Obviously, she's going to use them for some importance. But then she ends up not doing it. And it may just be me, I'll admit to that, but it is, from my perspective, frustrating when it's like, okay, well, you've gone and told me several pages of this character. There are 4 aunts. That has to mean something. Why are they in this book if they have no relevance? And it just kind of kept happening again and again. And that was frustrating. I don't want to presume how people grieve the death of anybody, especially children. But to me, to have her sister Allison and her mother both grieve in such a kind of similar manner, to basically make them both nearly catatonic, otherwise unless she needed them to do something to move the plot forward, was also kind of frustrating. The character of Allison being in the book at all, you're just kind of waiting for her to give some kind of information to Harriet. She never really does. You're waiting for Edie to give Harriet some information. She never really does. And so from just a plot perspective of just kind of this setup, on one hand, I respect it, because I do think that it was brave and bold to have this idea of just like, there's going to be a murder mystery. The detective character is going to come in, and they're just going to skip the whole evidence finding thing and go right to presumption of guilt. And while I thought that was interesting, especially considering it's in the mind of a 12-year-old, it ultimately was frustrating, because I didn't really believe that character would have done that. And I also felt like it made her less likable than she would have been, which, again, in any book, there's no real crime to make characters not likable. But for this book especially, I didn't really find people that like my heart necessarily went out to. And maybe that's partly because we don't get a lot of Robin as a character, and so it's hard for us to really... There are some signs of like why his loss is important, but from my perspective, this idea that you as a child who barely knew this person would somehow at the age of 12, just out of the blue, decide to make this your like life's mission was strange. That your older sister, who actually did know him, seems to have no interest whatsoever in any of this, also felt strange to me. And so I felt the book asked you to make a lot of leaps in logic that were kind of difficult, for me at least, to make. I do think that there are certain things and aspects in it that I think were interesting. I think the idea of tribulation, of kind of this lost fortune that this family had, and now it's gone, and it's kind of hearkening back to the good days, but then they all kind of misremember it better than it was. And then you have kind of contrasting that with kind of this new subdivision, which on the surface looks really modern and brand new, but is kind of built on a bad foundation. I thought were 2 interesting ideas that I wish she had kind of done more with. I don't know on the level of just kind of like realism and all that stuff. There was a little frustrating that you have certain characters who seem to have no money. Like Edie, I don't know what any of them do. I got the sense they didn't have very much money. I didn't understand why the Sunday school teacher would be so gung-ho about getting her into a new Cadillac when it seemed to me that she didn't have any money. And so that's kind of brought up a couple times. You're like, I don't understand why. And so there are just some things like that I felt made the book... Again, I don't know if the point is And like one of the themes is just kind of memory in general and how we think one thing is true when it's not. I think that's what she's trying to do in certain areas, but just overall, I had a hard time with the book. I think if the book had been, and I said this in my spoiler-free review, I think if the book had been a little bit shorter, I would have foregone some of those things. But it definitely felt like with the history of the family and with all the aunts and with Allison and with all these characters and the Odoms and all this stuff, I think there are some really cool set pieces. I think the part where they go into the mission, I don't know how Eugene afforded the mission apartment because it's never really mentioned. At least I didn't catch it being mentioned. But I'll just ignore that. That set's really cool. The scene at the end with the tower is pretty cool. So there are some cool set pieces in this. There's the dream sequence that Harriet goes through that I thought was interesting. So there's a few set pieces in this. I just didn't feel that was enough to sustain the full 625 pages without kind of other things to kind of bring with it. And I felt like there were some things that are below the surface and they didn't quite get to the full extension of that idea that I wanted, or they didn't quite pull into the plot the way that I wanted. And so that was kind of some of the frustrations with it. That's really all I have to say about the Little Friend. That's kind of my spoiler rant on it. I am kind of curious as to what other people feel about this. Like I said, my understanding from most of the videos or most of the reviews and whatnot that I've seen of this book, people talking about it, it always kind of pales in comparison to the other two Donna Tartt books. In some ways, I don't think that's necessarily fair. In some ways, I completely understand why it would pale in comparison. But that is The Little Friend by Donna Tartt. I will be reviewing Martin Amis in my channel. It's going to be a spoiler-free review of that. But if you're interested in checking that out, please do. Also, leave a link in the description here to the spoiler-free review in case you've made it this far and want to hear more just my general thoughts. So until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.